So you learned, and what was your fighting style?
Well, what was my fighting style?
Yeah, when you're practicing, what was it like?
I didn't really have a style, but because I did it for about 3 weeks, and
Right.
no one ever threw a punch at me,
Right.
but I threw a punch at this guy called Benny the Jet.
America fell in love with Meg Ryan because she made love feel safe. When she smiled, the world felt softer. When she fell in love on screen, millions believed in love again. She wasn't just an actress, she was a feeling, hope, warmth, and innocence wrapped into one unforgettable face. But behind the glow of America's sweetheart was a woman carrying the weight of perfection, trapped inside an image she never asked to become. Because when the world decides who you are, it rarely allows you to change. But what happens when the woman who taught the world how to fall in love is no longer allowed to change herself? This is not the story of chasing fame again. This is the story of reclaiming identity.
Before she became America's definition of love, before her name alone could promise romance and laughter, Meg Ryan was simply a young woman searching for her place in a world that had not yet decided who she was supposed to be. Her journey began far from red carpets and box office headlines, in the steady, demanding rhythm of daytime television. On As the World Turns, she learned the discipline of performance, the patience of storytelling, and the emotional precision required to connect with an audience every single day. Soap operas were not glamorous, but they were a training ground where actors learned authenticity. There, Meg discovered how to make emotion feel real, how to let vulnerability breathe, and how to turn small moments into something deeply human. Even then, there was something unmistakable about her presence. She wasn't trying to be larger than life, she was trying to be honest, and that honesty would become her greatest power. When she transitioned to film, it felt less like a leap and more like a natural unfolding. Early roles revealed a quiet magnetism, a rare balance between innocence and intelligence. She did not dominate the screen through force, she drew attention through warmth. Audiences leaned in when she spoke. They trusted her emotions because they felt lived in, not performed. Hollywood, always hungry for authenticity dressed in charm, began to notice that Meg Ryan carried something special. She did not play fantasy women. She played women who felt like neighbors, friends, and reflections of ourselves. Then came the moment that transformed everything. When Harry Met Sally in 1989 did more than launch her into stardom, it reshaped romantic cinema. Meg Ryan's Sally was not a polished, untouchable heroine. She was awkward, opinionated, vulnerable, funny, and deeply human. She made romance feel intellectual and emotional at the same time. Her famous scenes became cultural memory, not because they were shocking, but because they were honest. In that film, Meg Ryan didn't just perform romance, she redefined it. She showed that love could be complicated, uncertain, and still magical. Overnight, she became a star, but more importantly, she became a symbol. She represented a kind of love that felt attainable, a kind of happiness that felt real. Hollywood immediately understood what it had found. Meg Ryan was not just an actress, she was an emotional language, and audiences wanted to speak it again and again. Sleepless in Seattle in 1993 elevated her even further. Her presence in the film felt almost mythic. She embodied longing, hope, and destiny. She was the woman you waited for, the one who made distance feel temporary and love feel inevitable. Her performance was gentle, restrained, and profoundly affecting. She didn't need grand gestures. A look, a pause, a quiet breath was enough to carry the entire emotional weight of a scene. By the time You've Got Mail arrived in 1998, Meg Ryan had become a permanent fixture in the emotional imagination of America. This was no longer just success, this was cultural ownership. She represented romance itself. The way she laughed, the way she hesitated, the way she opened her heart on screen became shorthand for love in modern cinema. Paired with Tom Hanks, she created a chemistry that felt effortless, as if romance itself had found its perfect language. Together, they were not just characters, they were reassurance. They told audiences that connection was still possible in a fast-changing world. This was the moment when Meg Ryan became more than a star. She became an icon. The girl next door image was not weakness, it was power. It allowed people to project themselves into her stories. She wasn't distant or unattainable. She felt reachable. She felt familiar. She felt safe. That is why audiences trusted her. That is why her films became emotional anchors. She wasn't selling fantasy. She was offering comfort. Her relatability was her greatest strength. In an industry that often celebrated perfection, Meg Ryan celebrated imperfection. She made vulnerability attractive. She made uncertainty charming. She made emotional honesty powerful. Women saw themselves in her. Men trusted her sincerity, and Hollywood recognized something rare, a star who did not need spectacle to hold attention. Her authenticity was the spectacle. At her peak, Meg Ryan was one of the most bankable actresses in the world. Her films were not just box office successes, they were cultural events. Studios built projects around her. Audiences showed up because her name promised emotional satisfaction. She became Hollywood's romantic ideal, not because she was flawless, but because she felt real in a world obsessed with illusion. This was the height of her power, not just commercial, but emotional. She wasn't dominating charts, she was shaping how love was imagined. Her influence extended beyond cinema into the way people spoke about relationships, hope, and connection. To be a Meg Ryan movie meant something. It meant warmth, it meant heart, it meant sincerity. And yet, hidden inside this brightness was the beginning of a quiet burden, because when the world turns you into a symbol, it also limits who you are allowed to become. The crown of the rom-com queen was made of admiration, but it was also made of expectation, and expectations, no matter how loving, can become a cage. But in her rise, none of that was visible yet. What the world saw was magic. What the world felt was joy. Meg Ryan had not only risen, she had defined an era.
Success is a strange kind of blessing. It gives you everything you once dreamed of and quietly takes away something you never realized you would lose. For Meg Ryan, the crown of America's sweetheart was built from love, admiration, and trust. But over time, that crown grew heavier. Because when the world decides who you are, it also decides who you are not allowed to become. She had become more than an actress. She had become an emotional promise. Audiences didn't just watch her films, they leaned on them. They trusted her to make love feel safe, to make endings feel hopeful, to make vulnerability feel beautiful. That trust was powerful, but it was also fragile, and fragile things must be protected. The industry protected her image, the media protected her persona, and in doing so, they began to protect an illusion more than a person. Meg Ryan was frozen inside a single identity. The warm smile, the soft humor, the gentle femininity, the reassuring presence. These were not just characteristics anymore, they were expectations. She was not allowed to be angry, not allowed to be complicated, not allowed to be darker, rougher, or uncertain. The woman who had made romance feel real was now required to remain unreal. This is the hidden cost of perfection. When your image becomes sacred, your humanity becomes dangerous. Every role she accepted was judged not by its truth, but by whether it preserved her image. Every public appearance was measured against the version of her that lived in people's memories. Growth was interpreted as betrayal. Change was interpreted as failure. The same audience that adored her now unconsciously demanded that she remain unchanged forever. The burden was invisible but constant. It followed her into interviews, into scripts, into every career decision. If she chose safety, she was criticized for repetition. If she chose risk, she was criticized for rebellion. There was no winning. The perfection that built her fame had quietly become a prison. Being America's sweetheart sounds romantic, but it is also a role you can never step out of. It is a costume you are never allowed to remove. The world doesn't see the effort behind the smile, the exhaustion behind the charm, or the loneliness behind being endlessly adored but rarely understood. For Meg Ryan, the question slowly changed. It was no longer, how do I succeed? It became, who am I allowed to be? Public expectation stood in direct conflict with personal evolution. As she grew older, as her experiences deepened, as her understanding of herself changed, the image of sweetheart remained frozen in time. She was expected to stay youthful, gentle, and emotionally comforting, even as her real life demanded complexity, courage, and truth. Hollywood thrives on familiarity. It builds careers by repeating what works. But for the artist, repetition without growth becomes suffocation. And for a woman in Hollywood, the consequences are sharper. Men are praised for reinvention. Women are punished for it. Meg Ryan had become too successful at being loved, and love, when conditional, can be controlling. The burden of perfection is not about vanity, it is about identity. It is about being told, subtly and constantly, that your worth exists only as long as you remain who others need you to be. It is about feeling your own transformation collide with a world that refuses to evolve with you. Inside that conflict, silence grows, doubt grows, and eventually, distance grows. Not because you no longer care, but because you care too deeply to keep pretending. This was not a fall yet. It was something quieter, something more dangerous. It was the moment when success stopped feeling like freedom and started feeling like limitation. Meg Ryan had given the world romance, but the world had given her a role she was never meant to live forever.
Fame is fragile. It survives only as long as it remains convenient. For years, Meg Ryan was celebrated as the embodiment of warmth and romance. But the moment she stepped outside the boundaries of that image, admiration quietly transformed into judgment. What once felt like unconditional love revealed itself to be deeply conditional. The fall did not begin with failure. It began with her humanity becoming visible. In the early 2000s, Meg Ryan's personal life became public property. Her marriage to actor Dennis Quaid ended, and the divorce unfolded under the harsh glare of media attention. Instead of compassion, the narrative quickly turned accusatory. When her relationship with Russell Crowe became public, the story was no longer about complexity or emotional truth. It became about blame. The media painted her as the one who had broken the illusion of the perfect woman. The same culture that once celebrated her purity now punished her for being imperfect. The public rarely asked what she was feeling. They asked what she had ruined. This was the moment admiration shifted into judgment. Headlines grew sharper, sympathy grew thinner. The woman who had taught the world how to love was now portrayed as someone who had failed at it. Her private pain became entertainment. Her emotional reality was reduced to scandal. And suddenly, the world that once protected her image began to weaponize it against her. The paradox was cruel. She was punished not for wrongdoing, but for contradicting the fantasy people had built around her. As scrutiny intensified, Meg Ryan did something that frightened Hollywood. She refused to apologize through silence. Instead, she chose to speak through art. With In the Cut 2003, she made a bold and dangerous decision. She stepped into a role that shattered every expectation placed upon her. Dark, sexual, violent, uncomfortable. This was not a romantic heroine. This was a woman navigating danger, desire, and fear. For Meg Ryan, In the Cut was not about shock, it was about liberation. It was her declaration that she was more than the image that had defined her. It was an act of rebellion against perfection. It was her way of reclaiming complexity in a career that had demanded simplicity. But Hollywood was not ready to accept that transformation. Audiences who wanted reassurance felt betrayed. Critics who wanted familiarity felt disturbed. The industry, which profits from predictability, felt threatened. The reaction was swift and unforgiving. Instead of praising her courage, the film was framed as a mistake. Instead of honoring her range, her choice was treated as a violation of trust. It was as if Meg Ryan had broken an unspoken contract. She had dared to grow in a system that only rewards repetition. This is how Hollywood punishes reinvention, not loudly, quietly. Opportunities shrink, scripts stop arriving, conversations end. The doors don't slam shut, they simply stop opening. The industry began to distance itself from her. The roles that once flowed effortlessly disappeared. The excitement around her name softened into hesitation. She was no longer a guarantee of comfort, and in Hollywood, discomfort is dangerous. Meg Ryan had challenged her brand, and brands in Hollywood are not meant to evolve. The fall was not dramatic,
It was slow, subtle, emotional. It was the realization that she was no longer being seen as an artist, but as a risk, that her desire to explore truth had made her less valuable in a system built on illusion. At the same time, public judgment continued to echo. She was no longer discussed for her talent, she was discussed for her choices. Her identity was reduced to headlines, speculation, and moral verdicts. This was the true fall, not the loss of fame, but the loss of fairness. Meg Ryan had spent years offering the world sincerity. Now she was receiving suspicion. She had offered vulnerability. Now she was receiving condemnation. The transformation was painful, not because she feared criticism, but because she recognized the price of honesty in a culture that preferred comfort. Yet even in this darkness, there was power, because for the first time, Meg Ryan was no longer living for approval. She was living for truth. The fall was not her defeat, it was her refusal to remain a fantasy.
Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is disappear. Not out of weakness, not out of defeat, but out of self-respect. After years of living inside expectations that were never fully hers, Meg Ryan chose something Hollywood rarely understands: silence, distance, a life that did not need applause to feel real. Her retreat was not announced with drama. There were no grand statements or public explanations. She simply stepped away. And in that quiet, something powerful happened. For the first time in decades, she was no longer required to perform. She was no longer required to reassure the world. She was finally allowed to be a private human being. In Hollywood, absence is often labeled as failure, but in truth, absence can be healing, it can be protection, it can be survival. Meg Ryan's decision to step back was not about rejection, it was about preservation. She had spent years giving emotional truth to millions of strangers. Now she wanted to give that truth to herself and to her children. Motherhood became central, not as a role, but as a grounding force. Raising her children meant being present in a way cameras could never capture. It meant early mornings without makeup, late nights without scripts, and days shaped by responsibility rather than reputation. In a world that had always watched her, motherhood offered something sacred: invisibility. She was no longer America's sweetheart, she was simply a mother, and in that simplicity, she found freedom. For years, her identity had been filtered through characters, headlines, and expectations. During the retreat, she rebuilt herself from the inside out. She learned who she was without validation, who she was without praise, who she was without obligation to entertain. This was not an escape, it was a return to self. Living beyond the camera is a radical act in a culture obsessed with visibility. Hollywood teaches that if you are not seen, you are not relevant, but Meg Ryan challenged that belief. She proved that relevance begins internally, that worth does not fade with silence, that identity does not disappear when applause stops. In those quiet years, she rediscovered what Hollywood had taken: anonymity, stillness, and emotional safety. She no longer had to be charming. She no longer had to be gentle. She no longer had to represent romance. She was allowed to experience anger, doubt, growth, and contradiction without consequence. Choosing peace over visibility is a form of rebellion. While the world moved forward without her presence, she moved forward within herself. She was building a life where success was not measured by box office numbers, but by balance, where fulfillment was not defined by recognition, but by authenticity. This retreat was not about giving up art, it was about redefining its place in her life. Art was no longer the center of her existence, life was. There is something deeply powerful about choosing privacy in a world that demands performance, about choosing calm in a culture addicted to noise, about choosing truth when illusion is easier. The quiet years were not empty. They were full of growth no camera could capture, full of lessons no script could write, full of healing no audience could applaud. This was the season where Meg Ryan stopped being a symbol and started being a person again.
Hollywood may have seen her absence as disappearance, but in reality, she was finally appearing to herself. After years away from the relentless glare of cameras and the unyielding expectations of Hollywood, Meg Ryan's return was quiet, deliberate, and deeply intentional. This was not a comeback born of desperation or a need to reclaim a crown that had once been hers. This was a comeback born of choice, of maturity, and of the recognition that her voice, both on screen and behind it, still mattered. Her first step back into the public eye came from a place she had rarely occupied before, the director's chair. In 2015, Ryan made her feature film directorial debut with Ithaca, a heartfelt drama set against the backdrop of World War II. The film was intimate and nuanced, a far cry from the bright romantic comedies that had defined her career. Yet it carried the same emotional honesty that had always been her hallmark. Directing allowed her to reclaim control over storytelling, to shape narratives that resonated with her on a deeply personal level, and to explore the themes of love, loss, and courage from a perspective she had not fully owned before. It was a quiet statement. Meg Ryan was no longer just a performer. She was a creator, a storyteller in full command of her craft. But the story was far from over. Hollywood, and indeed her fans, had long associated her with romance, the laughter, the heartbreak, and the joy of falling in love. In 2023, she returned to that familiar terrain with What Happens Later, a romantic comedy that she both directed and starred in alongside David Duchovny. For many, this film marked the triumphant return of the woman who had once defined the genre. But for Ryan, it was about more than nostalgia or audience expectation. It was about agency. It was about choosing the story she wanted to tell, shaping it according to her vision, and reclaiming the genre on her own terms. After years of being defined by the roles offered to her, she was now defining the roles herself. This period of return was characterized by a remarkable clarity. No longer constrained by the pressures to maintain a perfect image or appease public perception, Ryan embraced creative control. She wrote, directed, and performed in ways that reflected not only her growth as an artist, but also her understanding of herself. She selected projects that resonated with her, not projects dictated by commercial pressure or nostalgia. In doing so, she demonstrated that a comeback is not about regaining what was lost. It is about stepping into a new chapter, fully conscious of one's worth and priorities. Ryan's return also underscored a broader truth about empowerment in Hollywood, particularly for women. The industry often sidelines female stars as they age, offering fewer roles and less creative influence. But by taking charge of her own narratives, Ryan turned what could have been a quiet re-entry into a powerful statement. Talent and vision are not diminished by time. Experience, maturity, and self-assurance can redefine relevance in ways that youth and novelty never could. Her comeback was met with a mix of anticipation, nostalgia, and scrutiny. Critics debated whether her return could capture the magic of her earlier work, while fans celebrated seeing her back in the genre she had helped to define. But for Ryan, the response was secondary. Her return was never about proving anything to the world. It was about proving something to herself, that she could navigate her career on her own terms, that she could create work that mattered to her, and that she could still connect emotionally with audiences in ways only she could. In this new chapter, Meg Ryan embodies empowerment. She demonstrates that a career hiatus does not signify the end, that absence can be a period of growth, and that a return can be a conscious reclaiming of agency. The romance she once portrayed on screen has evolved into something broader and richer. The romance between an artist and her own voice, the partnership between experience and creative vision, and the love of storytelling expressed with authenticity and control. Meg Ryan's return is a lesson in resilience. It is not a frantic rush back to former glory, but a confident, intentional stride forward. It is proof that reinvention does not erase the past, it builds upon it. And in returning on her own terms, directing, writing, performing, and choosing with care, she has redefined what it means to come back, not as someone seeking validation, but as someone fully empowered to shape her own story. This is the new Meg Ryan. Not just a star of romance, but a storyteller, a creator, and a woman who proves that the greatest returns are not about reclaiming the crown, but reclaiming oneself.
Meg Ryan's legacy is unlike that of many Hollywood stars.
it is not defined solely by box office numbers, awards, or fleeting headlines. Her legacy is defined by emotional resonance, by the cultural imprint she left on a genre, and by the quiet, deliberate choices she has made to shape her career on her own terms. In an industry obsessed with youth, image, and predictability, Meg Ryan has redefined what it means to be successful, not by surrendering to expectation, but by embracing authenticity, creativity, and dignity. At the heart of her legacy is her influence on romantic cinema. Long before the term rom-com became a marketing label, she embodied it. She gave life to stories where love was not just a plot device, but an emotional journey. Films like When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, and You've Got Mail did more than entertain. They shaped the way a generation thought about relationships, longing, and intimacy. Meg Ryan's characters were relatable, flawed, and human, yet imbued with hope and charm. She made audiences believe that love could be tender, playful, and transformative. And in doing so, she created a benchmark for how romantic stories could be told with sincerity and emotional depth. That influence persists today in the way romantic comedies are cast, written, and performed. Countless actors, writers, and directors cite her work as formative, a touchstone for storytelling that balances humor, vulnerability, and warmth. She was not merely playing a part, she was teaching audiences to recognize and value emotional honesty on screen. Yet her legacy is also profoundly defined by the power she has claimed over her own creative life. Meg Ryan's retreat and subsequent return to the industry highlight a career governed not by the whims of studios or box office trends, but by intention and autonomy. By choosing to direct, write, and star in projects like Ithaca and What Happens Later, she has demonstrated that female stars can and must claim control over the narratives they inhabit. Hollywood has historically marginalized women, especially as they age, offering fewer opportunities and pressuring them to conform to stereotypes. Meg Ryan's conscious decision to shape her work according to her values challenges that system. Her legacy now includes the example she sets, that it is possible to maintain relevance not through visibility alone, but through creative agency, integrity, and thoughtful curation of one's career. This is a message of empowerment, not just for her peers, but for the generations of women who will follow. Perhaps most strikingly, Meg Ryan has redefined success in Hollywood by showing that aging with dignity is not only possible, it is powerful. She has navigated a culture obsessed with youth and external perfection with grace, never compromising her sense of self for public approval. Her choices reflect a philosophy that true achievement is measured not by how the world perceives you, but by how faithfully you live your own story. She has resisted the pressure to maintain a youthful image at all costs, instead embracing the depth, experience, and wisdom that comes with time. In doing so, she transforms age from limitation into authority, showing that influence grows richer when rooted in authenticity rather than spectacle. Her legacy is therefore both cultural and philosophical. She reminds us that success is not synonymous with constant visibility or universal adoration. It is measured by the lasting impact of one's work, the courage to assert agency, and the capacity to maintain integrity in a system designed to commodify and constrain. Meg Ryan has created a body of work that continues to inspire romantic cinema, while simultaneously crafting a personal narrative that elevates empowerment, dignity, and creative freedom. Ultimately, Meg Ryan's story is a testament to the power of resilience and reinvention. She has transcended the limitations of image and expectation, leaving a legacy that balances emotional influence, artistic control, and human authenticity. Her name remains synonymous with romance, not just because she played love on screen, but because she exemplifies the kind of courage, self-awareness, and purpose that allows a career and a life to flourish on one's own terms. In reshaping her own definition of success, Meg Ryan teaches us that legacy is not inherited from accolades or applause, but crafted through choices, integrity, and the willingness to remain true to oneself, even when the world expects something else. In an industry that often forgets, she ensures her voice, her stories, and her values will endure, not as fleeting moments of fame, but as a lasting testament to what it means to live fully, creatively, and with dignity.
Redemption is a story that belongs to everyone. It is the quiet, persistent hope that no matter how far we fall, how deeply we stumble, or how the world misunderstands us, there is a way back, not to the life we once had, but to the life we were always meant to live. In Meg Ryan, America has found a living embodiment of that hope. Her journey resonates because it mirrors the human experience, the exhilaration of success, the pain of judgment, the necessity of retreat, and the quiet triumph of returning to one's own truth. For decades, Meg Ryan was the personification of joy and optimism. She made love feel real, tangible, attainable. Her performances offered reassurance in a world that often seemed uncertain, chaotic, or harsh. When audiences watched her, they saw themselves reflected in her laughter, her vulnerability, and her longing. She became more than an actress. She became a mirror for our own desires and emotions. Her rise was not only about fame or fortune, it was about connection. It was about creating a space where viewers could feel seen, understood, and emotionally validated. Yet that same visibility came with a cost. Public scrutiny, media judgment, and Hollywood's unforgiving expectations turned admiration into a heavy burden. Personal hardships were amplified, and every misstep or perceived misstep was dissected for the world to consume. The fall was neither dramatic nor violent, but subtle, relentless, and deeply human. It was the collision of identity and expectation, of selfhood and image, where the woman who had spent decades teaching us how to love now had to rediscover how to love herself. Her retreat, her quiet years away from the cameras, were not signs of defeat, but acts of courage. They were a declaration that life cannot be lived solely in the public eye, and that personal fulfillment is sometimes found in absence rather than presence. In stepping back, she reclaimed the right to evolve, to mother, to live authentically, and to experience life beyond the constraints of audience expectation. In doing so, she redefined what it means to be successful, not through applause, visibility, or accolades, but through self-awareness, growth, and inner peace. The comeback, when it came, was neither hasty nor performative. It was deliberate, measured, and profoundly empowering. Meg Ryan did not return to Hollywood to reclaim a crown or to prove she still belonged. She returned on her own terms, directing and starring in projects that resonated with her, exploring narratives she chose to tell, and reconnecting with audiences in ways that felt authentic rather than imposed. Ithaca and What Happens Later were not attempts to recapture former glory. They were celebrations of agency, experience, and creative control. In taking the reins of her career, she demonstrated that true redemption is not about re-entering the spotlight as it once existed, but about re-entering life fully, honestly, and on one's own terms. America loves Meg Ryan's redemption not because it is cinematic or newsworthy, but because it feels personal. We see in her story the truths of our own lives, the thrill of achievement, the sting of misjudgment, the necessity of withdrawal, and the beauty of reclaiming agency over our own destinies. Her journey reminds us that mistakes, failures, or periods of absence are not ends, they are transitions, that growth sometimes requires silence, that empowerment is strongest when it is self-directed rather than imposed. Her return is not about stardom, it is about truth. It is about a woman who has loved, lost, stumbled, and ultimately found her voice again. In reclaiming that voice, she offers audiences something profoundly human, the reassurance that no matter how intense the scrutiny, how steep the fall, or how long the silence, there is always a path back to authenticity. Redemption resonates because it is universal. Meg Ryan's story is a reminder that we are not defined by our peaks or our valleys, but by our courage to keep moving forward, to seek truth, and to honor ourselves along the way. America loves Meg Ryan's redemption, not just for the love she portrayed on screen, but for the life she has lived off-screen, resilient,
reflective, and fiercely authentic. In Meg Ryan, we see more than a return to the screen. We see a return to integrity, to selfhood, and to purpose. And that is why her story endures, not as a tale of fame regained, but as a lesson in the quiet, persistent, and profoundly human power of redemption.